The game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is constantly evolving. New cards rise and fall over the years, and multiple new mechanics have changed the entire game. But change doesn't just happen over time. There are cards that can instantly alter the structure of a Yu-Gi-Oh! Game, and those game changers are what this video is all about. Kicking off the recorded history of this list at number 10 is Hieroglyph Lithograph. This normal spell's name is quite appropriate because it's a really old card, first releasing way back in 2003 as part of Pharaonic Guardian. There are a few different ways you can look at this card. On one hand, Hieroglyph Lithograph is one of the few cards that when played, instantly and irrevocably changes the baseline rules of Yu-Gi-Oh! For the remainder of that game. And despite how powerful that sounds, it's also quite useless. After Hieroglyph Lithograph resolves, your hand size limit becomes 7, and that's it. Yu-Gi-Oh!'s default conditions set the hand size limit to 6, but this doesn't actually mean you can't exceed 6 cards in your hand. You can hold as many cards as you want until your end phase, when you would typically have to discard extra cards until you only have 6 left. But not if you activate Hieroglyph Lithograph. You can then get through your own end phase with 7 cards. It's worth noting that your end phase is the time when you typically hold the least cards, as this part of your turn happens after you've made your plays and set whatever back row, which only weakens the use case of Hieroglyph Lithograph. This card was probably intended for use with Slifer the Sky Dragon, whose attack and defense values scale to the number of cards in hand times 1,000. But I'm not basing that assertion off of actual play. You might notice that the 3 lithograph tablets come in different hues. Obelisk Blue, Slifer Red, and Raw Yellow respectively. So maybe there's some roleplay value in including this into your silly god deck. But hold on a minute. Think just for a second. Think to yourself, what if this card was even worse? Then realize that like all thoughts devoted to Hieroglyph Lithograph, this too is a waste. Because it actually is. In order to resolve the lithograph, you must pay 1,000 life points as an activation cost. And while this little extra cost doesn't make lithograph any better, it did help the card see play in Master Duel and also Duel Links, in self-burn decks designed to lose duels to access and to match rewards as quickly as possible. But hey, at least in Duel Links, you can maybe use the 1,000 life point self-burn to meet the activation requirements for a few skills. In conclusion, Hieroglyph Lithograph finds its way onto this list because it perfectly fits the prompt. It simply and explicitly changes game rules in a way that cannot be easily undone like many of the other cards on this list. Unfortunately, it's not particularly good or interesting, so to number 10 it goes. Please hold any applause for this list's number 9 pick, Quiet Life. This continuous spell entered the TCG as a super rare in the 2017 set Circuit Break. Unlike Hieroglyph Lithograph, Quiet Life's continuous nature means that its effect on the rules of the game isn't as permanent as our previous card. But that doesn't stop Quiet Life from drastically changing the way the game is played. While the card is face up, when a player normal summons, they're locked out of special summoning for the rest of the turn. Conversely, when they special summon, that player is locked out of normal summoning for the extent of the turn. The expectation in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that you get 1 normal summon plus as many special summons as you want. And as a result, many combo starters use your given normal summon to jumpstart plays. Quiet Life upends this expectation by forcing players to choose which summon category is more important. The player who activates Quiet Life must also make this choice, because the spell can only be activated at the start of the main phase 1 while you control no monsters. With the default rules of summoning twisted, both players will have to determine how best to remold their strategies into the shape of the new game. While an intuitive player will probably run Quiet Life alongside a strategy that either doesn't require a dedicated normal summon or rely on copious special summons during the turn, there's a special something that sets Quiet Life apart from the usual continuous floodgates. Quiet Life is notable for not merely excising a portion of the game by negating or penalizing certain cards. Sure, traditional floodgates like Imperial Order, Anti-Spell Fragrance, and Skill Drain change the game by forcing players to play differently. But Quiet Life doesn't necessarily outright prevent any specific move. It doesn't turn off normal summons or special summons, but instead presents players with a choice in how they play the game under new rules. And like many modern cards, its artwork is playful in its reference to those that came before. The Knight in Red Cape and Sentry shown relaxing in Quiet Life also appeared in the spell The Humble Sentry, itself a play on The Forceful Sentry. It's cool that things seem to be going okay for these guys. And at number 8, we have the field spell duo of Vaylantz World Shinra Bansho and Vaylantz World Konig Wissen. Both cards released alongside the rest of the first wave of Vaylantz cards in 2022's Tactical Masters. Field spells are one of Yu-Gi-Oh's most versatile card types. While early examples like Mountain and Sojin did almost nothing, barely boosting the stats of narrow categories of monsters, the field spell would evolve over time, both in power and complexity. The artificial exclusivity of only being able to control one field at a time has led to this category of card to become an archetypal staple, with the added boon of generic searchability, and the Vaylantz make extensive use of. On activation, Vaylantz World, Shinra Bansho, and Konig Wissen place their partner field on your opponent's board from the deck. This is a mandatory activation, meaning that if you have no copies of Vaylantz World Konig Wissen in deck, you can't activate Vaylantz World Shinra Bansho from hand and vice versa. While this is a little inconvenient, there's an important reason for this effect, and that's because conceptually both Shinra Bansho and Konig Wissen are two halves of the same field. Also, I'll go ahead and flag here that opening with the Vaylantz field turns your opponent's infinite impermanence dead in hand, which is nifty. Activating either Vaylantz field spell turns a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Into a game of Vaylantz. Let's get into how. With a few notable exceptions like Mech Knights, Link Monsters, Infinite Impermanence, and niche one-off cards like Rampaging Rhinos and Yadro Invader, Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards are for the most part zone agnostic. Generally, it doesn't matter what zones are occupied while attacking your opponent or activating effects. As long as you control a monster, your opponent can't attack you directly, and that's usually enough. Not so in the game of Vaylantz. Konig Wissen gives both players an alternative method of card removal, and Shinra Bansho offers both players the opportunity to return monsters vanquished by Konig Wissen back to the field. While the turn player controls a monster in the same column as an opponent's effect monster, they can activate Vaylantz World Konig Wissen to push their opponent back from a main monster zone into their corresponding spell trap card zone. This movement also destroys any spells or traps previously occupying that zone. Vaylantz World Shinra Bansho lets the turn player bring one of their monsters stuck in the spell and trap card zone to their unoccupied main monster zone in the same column ahead of it. In this way, the Vaylantz World adds a geographical component to the game of Yu-Gi-Oh!, equalizing the power gap between monsters. Sure, Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon is way stronger than Scion the Vaylantz Archer, but under conditions of Shinra Bansho and Konig Wissen, the winner of a head-to-head confrontation between the two just depends on the turn. Some stipulations persist, however. Neither Shinra Bansho nor Konig Wissen work on their own, meaning a card must exist in both players' field zones in order to resolve either effect. So I've talked a lot now about what those two field spells do, and have kind of glossed over what the Vaylantz as a whole actually are. I'll fix that with a quick summary now. The Vaylantz are an archetype of pendulum monsters that share a few common characteristics plus support. In the main deck, there are Vaylantz spellcasters and machines, who represent opposite teams on the same board. That game board, of course, are the Worlds of Vaylantz. Shinra Bansho houses the water attribute spellcasters, who draw inspiration from traditional Japanese history. Konig Wissen is the futuristic home of fire attribute machines, like Vaylantz Mad Marquise and Vaylantz Voltage Viscount. They all have effects on special summon and effects that trigger when they move to a new zone, with their mobility enabled by their own card effects and also the continuous spell Sinnet Switch, which can be searched alongside their field spell using Vaylantz Wars, the place of beginning. These qualities let them maximize values from both Vaylantz World Shinra Bansho and Vaylantz World Konig Wissen. Though the intended playstyle of Vaylantz is to transform the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Into a whole new beast, it's somewhat uncommon for the Vaylantz opposition to really get to use either field spell. Hojo the Vaylantz Warrior can bounce a spell or trap card back to hand, allowing you to turn off the field spell given to your opponent on an effect technicality. Archfiend is another strong generic pendulum monster, which can pop cards from your opponent's board and also your own for a cheeky Vaylantz World denial. Still, the Vaylantz concept is ambitious and cool, and changes the rules of the game enough to land a spot on this list. In 2015, the Clash of Rebellion set released and the game was changed forever, and I'm referring to Chicken Game, of course, because this field spell is number 7 on this list of cards that change game rules. When you see this field spell, you know your opponent is cooking something unhinged. While Chicken Game is phased up on the field, the player with the lowest life points takes no damage. No effect damage, no battle damage, just no damage, period. On top of this important adjustment of the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh!, Chicken Game also has 3 ignition effects, one of which the turn player can activate during the main phase by paying 1,000 life points. Those effects are draw a card, gift your opponent 1,000 life points, destroy Chicken Game. The idea here is that while you're behind, you can use Chicken Game to get ahead by drawing cards. You can also increase your opponent's life points to reopen them to damage by putting their count back ahead of yours. Critically, you can also end the Chicken Game, but true to its name, by electing to destroy Chicken Game, you're paying for no advantage, after presumably letting your opponent enjoy the card's benefits. Whoever pops Chicken Game is the chicken. And much like Quiet Life from earlier in this list, Chicken Game's art is also referential. Containing the Machine Monsters Overdrive and Oni Tank T-34, this field spell gives an aerial view of the events depicted in pole position, a continuous trap card famous for breaking the game rather than changing it. Chicken Game is a game on top of the Yu-Gi-Oh game you're already playing, and to make sure the game goes off, neither player is able to activate effects in response to Chicken Game's ignition. But why keep making things more complicated? The next spot goes to a card that changes the game by streamlining the rules by which you play. Terminal World is a continuous spell from the 2011 set Storm of Ragnarok, and the number 6 card on our list. The progression of a player's turn usually precedes the draw phase, standby phase, main phase 1, and battle phase, followed by main phase 2 and then the end phase. But isn't it inefficient to have 2 main phases? How can 2 phases be main anyway? Isn't one more main than the other? Well, yes. Terminal World distills the main phase by completely removing main phase 2 for both players. This brings play of the game in line with the format used by the Konami Dual Terminal arcade machines. These machines brought us the Dual Terminal World, a timeline populated by some of Yu-Gi-Oh's largest archetypes, including Ice Barriers, Fabled, Constellar, and many more. And they also had no main phase 2. Terminal World makes your game a new port of this arcade format, and for that it takes number 6. Passing the baton on to number 5, it's time to talk about Relay Soul. This normal trap from the 2014 set Dragons of Legend very immediately changes the kind of game you're playing, though its effect is very simple. When you activate Relay Soul, you can special summon a monster from your hand. While that monster is face up on your side of the field, you take no damage. When it leaves the field, you lose the duel. In a typical duel, your goal is to reduce your opponent's life points to 0, thereby winning the game. Your monsters help you accomplish this, and your opponent's monsters try to get in the way of your attacks and protect those precious life points. Relay Soul changes things. Removing damage as a material factor changes your opponent's win condition. Their default route to victory becomes toppling your chosen champion. While activating Relay Soul does provide you with a body on board and can enable a more aggressive playstyle free from the concern of damage, it does put you in a very vulnerable position. Usually your life points stick around longer than your monsters, so hopefully you picked a card with some protection. There are of course quite a few ways to circumvent a Relay Soul loss that results in a return to the original game rules. Firstly, you can make the chosen monster leave the field without legally leaving the field. This can be accomplished by using Relay Soul to summon a monster that can set itself to your spell and trap card zone as a continuous spell upon destruction, like Pump Princess the Princess of Ghost or any Crystal Beast monster. This works because the monster doesn't technically leave the field, but also no longer exists as a monster, providing a pretty nifty loophole. You can also use the monster summoned by Relay Soul as a material for an XC summon. Because XC's materials are no longer treated as monsters, you can again break the Relay Soul contract by a technicality. But easier than these two methods is probably just booking your chosen monster using cards like Book of Moon or Book of Eclipse. If your monster isn't face up on the field, it can't leave the field while face up, can it? Observant top 10 listicle enjoyers might note that the arm depicted in Relay Soul resembles that of Pharaoh Atem during his living tenure as King of Egypt. This tracks with Relay Soul's one anime appearance. In episode 181 of the Duel Monsters anime, Yamayugi uses Relay Soul to dodge defeat against Orichalco sorcerer Darts. After Dart's Divine Serpent Ged destroys Yamayugi's legendary knight Timaeus, only a last-minute activation of Relay Soul to quickly field Dark Magician Girl saves Yugi from losing the game. But if Relay Soul is such a cool card, why isn't it in Duel Links? Well, that's probably because it could potentially break the game. You see, in Duel Links, characters can activate special skills to support their decks. Sometimes these skills are good because they're ridiculously complicated, like Determination to Fight, Red Eyes Roulette, and Dragonic Contact. And sometimes Duel Links skills are powerful in their simplicity. At the time this video was written, Relay Soul is not part of Duel Links, but the Taya Gardner skill, Surprise Present, is. This skill lets you take one of your set back row and give it to your opponent without revealing the card that you give them. This becomes an FTK problem when you factor in Bait Doll. That's a spell that lets you force the activation of an opponent's set trap. As of writing, this card hasn't been added to Duel Links either, but there's a shadow over the app. The day Bait Doll and Relay Soul are added to an environment where set spells and traps can be frictionlessly foisted onto your opponent will be a pretty messy one. And at number 4, we'll be unpacking the many game-changing effects of Legacy of the Duelist. This continuous spell first released in 2017's Duelist Saga set and pays homage to early iterations of the game, and also one major play from the 2016 Yu-Gi-Oh movie, The Dark Side of Dimensions. When Legacy of the Duelist is on the field, not one, but several changes occur. It's worth noting that while most of these changes are activated effects of a continuous spell rather than actual rule changes, they embody a spiritual shift to earlier formats of proto-duel monsters encountered in the manga and anime. With Legacy of the Duelist active, an attacking player has the option to negate their own attack to target and destroy a spell or trap card controlled by your opponent. This is meant to evoke expert rules, which refer to the format played by Duel Monsters characters using Seto Kaiba's Discus-style Duel Disc Alpha models. Playing in this way, duelists could attack spells and traps with their monsters, with Legacy of the Duelist's first effect being a modern interpretation of this mechanic. Legacy of the Duelist also harkens back to Super Expert rules, which encapsulates Duel Monsters as it was played during Seto Kaiba's Battle City tournament. This is the rule set that first introduced mechanics like tributing for cost to summon high-level monsters, and also the ability to attack directly. Legacy of the Duelist ports two passive Super Expert aspects. First, it makes all monsters summoned from the extra deck wait a turn before declaring in battle. In the days of Battle City, the extra deck only had fusion monsters, but Legacy of the Duelist extends this hindrance to future extra deck evolutions. Legacy of the Duelist also prevents players from setting more than one spell or trap card per turn, a ruling exclusive to the manga version of Battle City. Legacy of the Duelist's final effect can activate during the draw phase before a card is drawn. By giving up that draw, you can add a monster from your graveyard to your hand. This is a reference to Seto Kaiba's Dark-Sided Dimension duel against Ayagami. With his back against the wall and nowhere else to turn, the CEO of Kaiba Corp punches the earth and whips a copy of Obelisk the Tormentor out of the void. This lets him avoid disillusion by the power of Plana, and also inspires Legacy of the Duelist's last effect. And we're shaking things up for the number 3. Just kidding, it's another continuous spell. But unless something wild happens between the time this is written and the time it will air, this one is entirely unique within the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Convulsion of Nature is a card from 2003's Legacy of Darkness set, and if you love blindsiding your locals with weird stuff, it's your best friend. While Convulsion of Nature is face up, both you and your opponent flip your main decks upside down. Your bottom deck card becomes your new top deck, and you can see what it is before you draw it. Same deal for your opponent. This is a really weird change that changes a major part of the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! By providing advanced knowledge of top decks to both players, Convulsion of Nature removes the unknown draw variable from strategic calculation. Realistically, this will mostly just shorten games by encouraging players to scoop when they know the heart of the cards holds nothing for them. But Convulsion of Nature does have a few funny interactions. Cards that require a player to guess their next drawn card become sure bets under Convulsion of Nature. So if you're already deep enough down the game, changing the rabbit hole that you're fielding this card, consider also running cards like Archfiend's Oath and The True Name. The combo of Convulsion of Nature and Archfiend's Oath did have some utility and FDK strategies that relied on using Royal Magical Library's spell power draws to collect the pieces of Exodia. By using Giant Trunade to bounce both continuous spells, you could reactivate them to repeat the guess and draw effect while furthering your library's spell counter win condition. Outside of gimmicky FDK strategies like Royal Magical Library Exodia and Reversal Quiz Burn, Convulsion of Nature also has utility in Spiral decks, who have many cards that activate effects when you're able to correctly deduce the category of your opponent's top deck card. An electrical charge fills the air as a line that is both there and not perforates the space in front of you. Invisible layers of matter peel back to reveal a searing realm that burns your eyes even after they're closed. Upon opening, you spy in the kaleidoscope fire a strange, chitinous hand. It holds something. A jewel. An offering. Time-Tearing Morganite is this list's number 2 pick. A super rare spell from the 2023 set, Cyberstorm Access, this card made a quick enough impact to immediately see release an upgraded Prismatic Secret Rare rarity as part of the 2024's 25th Anniversary tin Dueling Mirrors. A big part of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is using hand-trap monsters to interrupt your opponent's plays to lower the ceiling of their combos. Cards like Drawn Lockbird, Nibiru the Primal Being, and all the Molt Charming and Ghost Girl cards for years have comprised some of the game's most played cards. Basically an imperative inclusion if you want to win. Time-Tearing Morganite presents a novel answer to the problem of how to keep up with your opponent. On resolution, several effects are applied for the rest of the duel. First, you can no longer activate monster effects in the hand. This is a pretty huge downside. But let's see what benefits Time-Tearing Morganite has to offer. First, you get to draw 2 cards during each draw phase instead of 1, which is pretty cool. That's like top decking Pot of Greed every turn, and that's not all. You can also conduct 2 normal summons instead of the typical 1. Also, if you happen to draw into another Time-Tearing Morganite, it's not dead in hand. By banishing a copy of Time-Tearing Morganite from grave, You can discard another copy from your hand. For the rest of the turn, your opponent cannot activate effects in response to your normal summons. But let's pull back and take a more holistic view of this card. What does it do? Well, it gives you a huge advantage in simplified game states and longer grind games. It works great with Fossil Dyna Pachycephalo stun strategies since you'll accumulate resources faster than your opponent, and also field monsters faster through your abundant normal summons. Time-Tearing Morganite is also a great card for Flunderies, a strategy that's all about normal summoning a million times. Speed is a crucial component to the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And hand trap monsters provide one avenue controlling the pace of the game by hampering your opponent. Time-Tearing Morganite offers another route. By reconfiguring the rules, the player can use extra draws and summons to mitigate the downsides of losing access to all those hand traps. Time-Tearing Morganite takes such a high spot on this list because in addition to having an interesting rule change effect, it also is just really good. Convulsion of Nature is unique, and that's fun, but Time-Tearing Morganite is unique and useful, so number 2 it goes. But as cool as Time-Tearing Morganite is, isn't it kinda bland that it only tears time? Kind of over-specialized, to be honest. Meanwhile, the number 1 card on this list is a Destroying Things generalist. Check out Makyura the Destructor. This level 4 Dark Warrior has 1600 attack and 1200 defense, and first released in the TCG as part of the 2004's Dark Beginning 1 reprint set. While the modern Makyura has been printed with erratas, that means it can only leverage a fraction of its original power, early editions of Makyura the Destructor broke Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's the version of the card we're going to be starting with. During the turn pre-errata Makyura is sent to the graveyard, you can activate trap cards from your hand. Just a few simple words. That's it, and that was enough. The main difference between spells and traps is that trap cards cannot be activated instantly. You must set them and wait a turn before activation. And traps have historically been designed with consideration paid to this built-in drawback. Draw power spells often come with some sort of cost or once per turn limitation. Even Upstart Goblin treats your opponent to some life points. On the trap side of things, we have Jar of Greed, Good Goblin Housekeeping, Reckless Greed, and more. The original Makyura basically lets you functionally run a deck much smaller than the 40 card minimum, making it great for FTKs that rely on accumulating specific cards. Yes, this of course means Exodia, but that wasn't Makyura the Destructor's only application. Like Makyura, the trap card Exchange of the Spirit was also on the receiving end of a few erratas. Today, both players must have 15 or more cards in the graveyard to resolve its effect, but on release, only you had to have a full graveyard to activate the card. When Exchange of the Spirit resolves, both players switch their graveyards with their deck. This means that using Makyura's infinite trap activations from hand, you could resolve an unerrated Exchange of Spirit on turn 1, forcing your opponent to swap their deck with an empty grave, and causing them to deck out during their very first draw phase. While the new Exchange of Spirit has been errata to make this FTK impossible, it's still an interesting way that the original Makyura's rule change could turn cards suddenly lethal. But rather than Exodia or Exchange of the Spirit, the cards most frequently paired with Makyura the Destructor before its errata were Dark Scorpion Check the Yellow and Call the Haunted. By sending Makyura and Check the Yellow to the graveyard during the same turn, you could use Call the Haunted from your hand to revive Chick and engage in a game-ending loop. Upon inflicting battle damage, Check the Yellow can bounce a card back to the hand. By targeting your own Call the Haunted, you could then immediately replay it during the same battle phase to bring back Check the Yellow, destroyed by the bouncing of its revival trap. Given all of this, it's not super surprising that Makyura the Destructor was also instantly banned, going to a hard 0 copies of the TCG with the April 2005 Forbidden List update, only 6 short months after its release in Dark Beginning 1. Makyura would remain forbidden in the TCG for many years, finally returning at 3 copies in September of 2020. This was only possible because of an errata, of course. The new Makyura the Destructor only lets you activate 1 trap card from your hand during the turn it's sent to the graveyard, drastically reducing the ways you could exploit its effect to instantly win. But even though the text of the card changed, so had the wider game. After Makyura the Destructor, Konami had never really dabbled with enabling match trap activations from hand. A few traps innately have this ability, like Infinite Impermanence and Evenly Matched, but those are single examples designed around their own effect. Makyura the Destructor was a Jenga-style experiment with the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh! That resulted in a whole tower falling down, leading to bans and erratas. For this reason, it takes the number 1 spot on our list. Alright, and that's the list. But there are a few more cards that change, invert, and generally make a joke of Yu-Gi-Oh's rules. So if I missed your favorite, or if you have ideas for future videos just like this one, please let us know down in the comments below.